Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Smart Building series, and this is our 7th free webinar in the 2022 series. And this is going to be our last one for the year. And I think we're finishing off really strong with a webinar about what building owners need to know about cyber security insurance. And I'm joined by Tina Jolliffe from Consort Insurance, and I'm going to ask Tina to introduce herself in a bit. First of all, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So we are recording this session, and it will be available online on our YouTube channel, and I'll obviously post a link to that on our website as well later on. So feel free, please, to share it with colleagues and friends. Beyond that as well, we want to make this an interactive session. So Tina's got a great presentation. I think it's going to be really useful, and it should also, I hope, stimulate some good questions. So if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. If you can type them in there, I'll be able to get them, and then we'll tackle those questions after Tina's finished her presentation. So Tina, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's great to have you.
Sorry, it's great to hear from you all, and good afternoon, good morning, whatever your relevant time zones are.
Exactly, yeah, and we're very interested to hear your presentation, and we've had some good conversations, and I think, as you know, we've written quite a lot about this subject, so really interested to hear what you have to say today. Take it away.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you again for your time today and for the invitation to present on cyber insurance. Coming obviously very much from the insurance perspective, and taking you through the journey of obviously risk, transfer of risk, how cyber is actually made up, and obviously giving you a few scenarios on the way. But just kicking off a bit about myself. My name is Tina Jolliffe. I've worked in insurance for 31 years, mainly in Aon for 28 years, who's obviously a large insurance brokers, specializing in FTSE 100 and 250 companies, ranging from sectors right the way through from hospitality to oil to genetics. So very much a generalist at heart, and do actually obviously know a lot about all manner of insurance, but today we're just going to concentrate on cyber. From cyber perspective, the risk has obviously evolved and changing, and is changing very, very rapidly, and keeps us all on our toes at the moment. Building owners in particular, I think, and managers have quite rightly at the beginning maybe not seen the full extent of cyber to owning and controlling buildings. But I think as time's gone on and intellectual and intelligent buildings have grown, and infrastructures within the buildings have grown, there is actually more of a need to consider this as a risk. So just so you know, cyber insurance started about 15 years ago, really kind of took off in America. It is seen as the norm in America. The rest of the world are kind of catching up slowly, but we are getting there. So agenda, just a bit about myself. I will tell you how Consort have actually come into insurance and what we're trying to do, a little bit of a definition of insurance risk, emerging risks, obviously a topic that we look at each year, and obviously then cyber and a bit of a summary. So who are we? I have got a little bit of an online video, but we'll send this to you after the session. I think would be better. Basically, as I said, I moved from Aon to a specialist insurance brokers to specialize in construction and the fire industry. We in the UK are seeing a particular issue with professional indemnity and the lack of insurance markets. This is not just because of obviously the horrific incident with Grenfell, but it's also because of legacy controls or lack of systems and processes within the UK. How we work is we have aligned ourselves to the FIA and the ASFP. So that is the Fire Institute Association and the Association for Specialist Fire Protections. So how we work is slightly different. We obviously sell insurance. We obviously are insurance brokers, but we also pride ourselves in actually teaching and providing e-learning and continual professional development. So back to a few basics, and I apologize for people on the call today that are, you know, experts in insurance, and I'm sure a lot of you deal with this on a day-to-day basis, and obviously in a business environment, but obviously private environment as well. But the basics of insurance, let's get back to the actual core of what insurance is all around. It is obviously the possibility of something going wrong that would expose your business. And that's a financial loss, of financial damages. Insurance cannot insure everything, but I think we obviously always start with the premise with any new business, any client, what keeps you awake at night? It's that question. But from an insurance perspective, it very much is that aligning the risk and the risk to the balance sheet to obviously what you can purchase in the insurance market. Insurance obviously is mainly around assets and liabilities. Started off, as I'm sure everybody is aware, with fire and marine, leading into business interruption, liability from third party to employees, onto directors and officers, and now we're merging into obviously our new baby, which is obviously cyber. Just along the way, we've obviously done things like terrorism insurance, political risk insurance, and a new one that's very much coming to the forefront is parametric tools, but we'll touch on that further on. So just at this juncture, I want to make it really clear that sometimes people forget that insurance is a contract of law. Bruce is our current chairman of Lloyd's, a great, I'm going to say, if anyone has the opportunity to listen to him, he's a fantastic speaker around insurance. But one of his big things, his key things is actually insurance is a contract of law where money is passed, but one party may never see a return. There is no other contracts in law like this. And if you think about your own car insurance at this point, you know, let's all assume, and I assume everyone on this call today is excellent drivers, you will pay a premium and you will never see any return on that unless you have an accident. And that could go on for years and years. So it is a very unusual purchase of I'm going to say, a contract. Obviously, it's very unusual for one party never to see a return. But obviously at this juncture, I've got to bring in our building. She is very iconic. She's also inside out, made obviously specifically for that reason that Lloyd's needed space inside. Very iconic, and she has definitely, as she's got older, I think become more. People are appreciating Lloyd's building a lot more as a structure. Now inside, believe it or not, on the right-hand side, that's 1948, a painting that was drawn. And obviously on the other side is how we are today. We haven't changed. Insurance is very much that kind of meeting of minds. And cyber in particular is even more of an issue of understanding the information and the risk you are presenting to the underwriter. So emerging risks, just a quick rattle through. This is obviously kind of the main emerging risks we're seeing within the insurance and obviously the global market at the moment. Now, many of these, believe it or not, they may not be insurable, but an element of them are insurable. So if we look at climate change as an example, and I've mentioned earlier, obviously parametric tools. Parametric tools are very sophisticated tools to monitor and have effectively an agreed price. How it works is, and the best example is flood. They have monitors now at the side of buildings, and when that flood is, or the water level goes above the limits, then the policy automatically pays out. They are very, very an efficient way of actually protecting. So it's an interesting method of obviously buying insurance. Debt crisis, we are seeing more and more companies coming to us about credit insurance. Pandemic, we'll touch on that juncture because obviously on a global basis, there was a lot of uncertainty of whether insurance should pay for the pandemic. And let's be really clear, some policies did have pandemic covers, such as event cancellation policies. But in the main, no, policies would not cover for a global pandemic event. Obviously, there was court and legal action, and there was different outcomes on that. But just to kind of be really clear on that, the global government response on pandemic was 14 trillion. The insurance market, the whole global insurance market, is 2 trillion. So, I mean, that alone, you can see we weren't made to obviously, or we weren't set up to pay for pandemics. Moving on kind of onto our big topic of the moment is the cyber. And just to kind of put some kind of context, insurable or not insurable, you know, that is the question at the moment. You can buy cyber insurance. Cover is being restricted and limits are being restricted, but with information such as security, cyber security information, your systems, your processes, then cover can be obtained and still at reasonable prices for the risk that you're presenting. So just moving on from that, the big headlines. Cyber is a big business. Let's not be fooled by this for 1 minute. The criminals are well funded. They are sophisticated in their deception, and they're getting more sophisticated. I would highly recommend everybody on this call today to actually all have a look at the IBM costs of data breach report. These come out annually, and they have actually been quite frightening reading year on year. I mean, they are now saying that the average breach is 4.35 million. They're saying 83% of global companies have got more than one breach. Phishing incidents cost an average of 4.91. And just bear in mind that a lot of the statistics within their report is really based on SME and mid-market businesses, because obviously the skew, if you actually put the multinationals in there, would just be kind of off the Richter scale, let's be quite honest. Interesting ransomware, obviously in the UK, 1.8 million. And even today, we've actually just had a report in a security magazine saying that 40% of UK manufacturers have been a victim to cyber crime in the last 12 months, which is a frightening statistic. Cyber affects all parts of the business. I think we've got to be really clear here. It's one of the risks. If you think about you know, your fire insurance, obviously a building burns down, that's horrific. It has obviously, you know, you want it rebuilt, you've got business interruption, loss of rent, etc., etc. But actually things like your HR, whilst could be mildly effective, it's not going to really have a major impact. The difference with cyber, it can affect all parts of a business: HR, manufacturing, operations, and facilities. And interestingly, the one common factor on many, if not all, cyber incidents is humans. We are seeing, obviously, from human error to obviously deliberate acts, obviously all stemming from human intervention. Now, let's look at cyber as an insurance coverage. Obviously mentioned that it's available. There's increases with regards to restrictions around limits and coverage. But basically insurance, it's split into three parts. There's the first party, the third party, and the insurance response. So let's kind of go into that a little bit more. The first party is obviously the one that you think about is actually online retailers. They kind of started coming to the cyber insurance very early on, because obviously they saw loss of revenue from a business interruption loss from downtime of their systems. We're moving to obviously kind of building and kind of the concerns and the risks that we are seeing. We are seeing things quite horrifically with regards to possible extortion from lifts being threatened, denial of access, so preventing tenants from actually gaining access to the buildings, which obviously will have a knock-on effect from a revenue point of view for business owners, for building owners. We're also seeing kind of losses occurring from shared networks and owned devices, which is obviously bringing malware into the systems. And I think we've got to say at this juncture, you know, I've spoken to many clients, especially around old buildings, that they do believe that they won't be prone to an attack. But I think we've got to bear in mind that obviously modern technology going into buildings are seeing changes in the risk, and they are as vulnerable as a modern building with modern systems in. So, you know, just kind of thinking back on that, you know, there's other things that kind of the other costs associated with a cyber incident would be notification of customers. And obviously we're seeing more and more reputational costs. You know, it is important how the building is seen, or the companies are seen from a reputational costs. So moving on to kind of third party is obviously data losses from a breach. And obviously the interesting one in the UK we had in April 2020 was the Morrison situation with employees' data that was actually a rogue employee basically let the information out into the ether, into the internet. Now, it went to the Supreme Court, and it was quite interesting that it was actually held that the employer had not be held vicariously liable for the actions of their rogue employee, which, you know, on the face of it is a great result for employers. However, we kind of look at this and go on further from that. The implication actually, if that had not been a rogue employee, and it had been an accident, and data had actually been let into the internet. Interesting, one of the things on this case in particular is what the employees did in their joint action. They actually went for the employer under employer's liability. They actually went under effectively the statutory obligation in the UK to obviously insure your employees, and they went for mental anguish. So again, it wasn't under a cyber policy, it was actually under a traditional insurance purchase. Now, that is called a lot of the actual traditional insurance markets or insurance policies to start pulling back cyber extensions or areas that could actually be misinterpreted. And nowadays it is very clear that you should be really clear about your cyber and data should be under a cyber and data insurance policy, not under liability policies, etc. There is obviously overlaps because of the nature of how insurance works, but we can touch on that earlier. The other area that the policy splits into is obviously insurers' response and the support. Now, insurers have actually invested millions into actually kind of their response. And whilst we kind of say, as I mentioned earlier on the slides about insurance is actually one of the areas that one party will never see a return, cyber is slightly unusual because you can see a return and no claim. Now what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example, an insurer called CSIS. They have developed in conjunction with the software company, a monitoring system of all their clients. So once you become a policyholder, you have to download their app. Now, this app is effectively sitting behind the scenes and monitoring what is happening to their policyholders. Now, interestingly, they monitored a situation where they believed that one of their policyholders was going to have a phishing attack. And they were about to pounce, i.e. notify their policyholder, when the actual criminals changed at the last minute and started going for a very large medical hospital in France. And what happened in that situation is that this insurer actually notified the hospital and told them, you're about to be attacked. Very unusual situation in that, you know, it doesn't really happen normally, but it was being watched and monitored. And actually the hospital cyber insurers were very grateful for CFC. And these are the sort of services that you know, insurers are offering to help mitigate and to help stop these sorts of attacks, and obviously protect themselves as well from paying out substantial claims. Phishing, cybercrime, just to touch on that quickly, is an area that unfortunately we are seeing more and more of. They are watching, there's no two ways about it. I had a particular incident with a CFO whose child was seriously ill. we all obviously under emails were writing nice little emails to him saying, very sorry to hear this and understand you're out of the business for a while, blah, 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 blah. And this was obviously, you know, known within the company. That's when the criminals attacked. They basically knew an amount of money was due to be paid, substantially, we are talking millions. And they did a very plausible, effectively phishing exercise. Bank details were changed and the money was transferred into the wrong account. That one, we were very lucky that the CFO had an extra safety check with his bank and nobody knew about it within the organization. And no money would be released to any bank account until a specific code was put in. So it was a very unusual case that because it was stopped. But I think it's just got to be mindful that they're always phishing and they're always obviously looking into people and what's going on. And they will strike when their company can be vulnerable. Ransom payments is an interesting one. We have a whole situation with whether we should or whether we shouldn't pay ransom. But I think we've got to bear in mind that there is a train of thought that obviously a lot of this is obviously funding terrorism. So this one in particular, we will see changes, I do believe, in the not too distant future about how insurers can actually pay ransom extortion payments. Just a little bit of a fact finding about country cyber incidents and where we stand today, this year. So far, there's been 87 alleged and known incidents from country to country. This obviously, as I mentioned on there, is from the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. The interesting one on there is, I think, is July 2022 and June 2022, when China alleged that the US stole 97 billion pieces of global internet data, and then the US accused China of doing exactly the same. The interesting one, obviously, we've got denial of access attacks. Again, this is particularly of concern when we're talking infrastructure. So with obviously the London ports, the UK London Ports Authority, obviously shipping, unloading, etc., etc. You know, and there has been cases of this, not just obviously in the UK, on a global basis of ships out in the high sea being under attack. So again, back to these things are happening, and it is just things to be aware of, that it's not just small companies, small organization, it is obviously big organizations as well are being hit on a regular basis. So just areas to consider. The first one is quite an important one about contract terms. Cyber is, again, cyber and data is one of those areas that actually contracts really, really do matter. And I'm not talking obviously on contracts of insurance, I'm talking about contracts where you're actually kind of onboarding, say, for example, IT service providers, to be aware that actually you actually want to actually ensure that you have contractual redress, because we're finding that many losses are occurring from vendors, from the situation of IT providers having loopholes in their contract, or actually ensuring that they don't effectively be on the hook for losses. An example I had was an online retailer who basically, coming to an end of season sale, they basically had software to basically, when the customer went on and it was out of stock, it would push them to say, oh, we haven't got any more black, but would you like it in white? Would you like it in pink? This system basically overnight didn't tell, and the American market was online, and the system wasn't telling this, or the website, that it was no longer in stock. So over a period of 4 hours before it was found, the client had actually effectively sold 500,000 of stock they didn't have. So they were a massive retailer, and the implication is obviously, what do? You haven't got the stock, it's not there. So again, it's that brand reputation. So with that situation, it was again back to the professional indemnity, or the terms they'd actually engaged with their software developer as far as what the system should and should not be doing. So those things are very important. As I've mentioned earlier, obviously dovetailing your policies, your insurance programs. One particular area to bear in mind, again, is technology. Technology, cyber, it obviously goes hand in hand, but as I mentioned earlier, it goes in hand for your professional indemnity as well. How your actual software is doing what it should be doing or not doing what it should be doing. So there is a whole thing about your professional indemnity, your cyber, your product liability should be really, if possible, with the same insurer, to start thinking about, if there is a loss, one of the policies or one of the sections of the policy would react, and how it would react to a cyber insurance. And you don't want the situation of conflicting insurers or many loss adjusters or investigations at that point. Ransomware, as I mentioned earlier, we have had incidents on a global basis where the ransomware demands have been to the penny of the limit of the policy. So there is calls now that we are actually saying that really your extortion stroke ransom section under your policy should be confidential. People shouldn't know how much your limit and what you are purchasing, because we have seen that actually now happening, that people know exactly how much people are buying. So other things, just to kind of, on this point, just one other thing to kind of just flag is, again, I've mentioned it about insurer services, but again, at the time of an incident, the beauty of actually having an insurance policy and a response team, because that's what the insurers provide on hand, is very, you know, and I've seen the benefits for many clients picking up the phone where they think they're under attack or need an advice. And these companies are obviously blue chip companies to give proper advice and to actually know whether there is a true and real threat to the business. So just summing up, you know, emerging risks are very big for the global insurance market. Extortion continues to be a problem for all. And we've got digitalization versus data. And what I mean by that is that, you know, obviously home working, the growth that we've seen in this area, it is excellent for companies, but we have to be mindful of actually the security protection and how it is being managed by the companies. So I kind of say, I think that's kind of just rounding off, just to thank everybody for their time. I hope that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of insurance, cyber insurance, and obviously emerging risks we are seeing at the moment. And I hope that is of help to everybody.
Thank you, Tina.
Any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who has some questions, please type them in on the Q&A box. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. Yeah, look, fascinating. I think it's such an interesting subject, because I guess it's something that I don't know too much about, right? So it's great to kind of hear some of these issues from, you know, someone who's deeply involved in the insurance industry. I think it's sort of my initial thoughts about things. I mean, there are a lot, and this is a very detailed subject, but I think if I put myself in the position of some people within the smart building and the property industry, about what they would be thinking and about what they might want to understand. So, for example, from an owner-operator perspective, someone who owns a commercial building, Tina, like, what do you consider? Let's say that they know this is a growing issue. What do you consider what advice would you give them is like best practice, or the first things that they should be considering?
I definitely think it's obviously what's going into the buildings nowadays, and actually the vulnerabilities. And I mean, obviously in the UK, we've got a lot going through with the Building Safety Act. We've got lots of regulations coming in, obviously following the horrific situation with Grenfell. But I think again, it's that responsibility. Do you actually understand the vulnerabilities of the systems that you're putting in, or the fact that your tenant is bringing in their own devices? You know, are the penetration tests being undertaken? it's those sorts of questions that should be asked to the IT security providers, as well as the people providing the software. And, obviously I've mentioned to you in the past, I look after one of the iconic buildings in London, a very old one. And there was a conversation with regards to their new lift system. And they did believe that the building is so old. But I was saying, but you're putting new technology within that can have those vulnerabilities. So I really think those are the questions you need to ask, how it interfaces, how it works with shared networks, et cetera, et cetera. So those vulnerabilities, those are actually nipped in the bud before anything actually occurs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great advice. So I think, let's say if you're dealing with a vendor, someone who is you're thinking of acquiring and installing their technology, you would want a service agreement which says what, right? It says that they guarantee a certain level of security, or what would you expect?
It's more the fact of how they actually will protect the system, i.e. from the IT security software, what they will be using, how will they update it, how will they make sure it keeps being updated. It's those sorts of things. You'd also make sure in the contract that if they actually it is their software that fails to perform, so that's effectively an efficacy risk. So they've given you some software, it doesn't do what it's meant to do on the tin. We would then say that's an efficacy risk, and they should actually have cover for that, as well as their obviously professional service. So what I mean by efficacy is it causes a financial loss. Now, what I'm thinking from a building point of view is obviously a denial of service, where tenants cannot have access to the servers or the systems, the networks, that then brings it down for a period of time, and then they lose obviously financial loss themselves. So we're talking, if we look at a foreign exchange, something like that, something that is very crucial on real time, and the loss of a system being down that's within a building because of servers or some sort of software could be significant.
Mm-hmm. And you said something before, which I thought was interesting as well. Obviously, an owner of a building, quite likely that they rent it out. So you have these tenants, and a lot of them bring in their own systems, their own IT systems, and I suppose building technology. Would you then, that I guess is contractual, right? So you would pass on the liability to them to say, okay, well, if it's your technology, it's your responsibility to make sure that it's cyber secure.
Absolutely, but then they most probably then engaging with a vendor to do it for them as well. So again, from that supply chain point of view, you really need to understand the security that's going into that software, that's going into your building effectively. So it is that overarching. If something enters your system, could it affect the whole of the building? And I think that's the important thing. It's the fact that your tenants want to bring in X, Y, Z, absolutely, and we want the tenants to come in. We want more tenants, the better, sort of thing. But there has to be a responsibility of who they are engaging with and how they're actually looking at kind of infiltrating or kind of replicating the systems, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Ties into something that we've written about, or that I've sort of seen as a trend in the market, is landlords now also being technology providers, right? In the sense that they're obviously not going away and developing technology, but some of them are certainly investing in technology, but then they're offering these technologies as a suite, I guess, to their tenants. Say, okay, well, we've sold you this, or you have this lease with us now here are some technologies that we would recommend to you, and then they sell them a service there as well. So I guess in some ways that's not a bad thing either, because you can ensure you will ensure that those services you're offering are at a good level, or at least have a good level of cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, right across the piece, so obviously in the UK, it's obviously cyber essentials. How are the vendors or the software company engaging? What are they doing? But I think it's really important, though, the overarching part of the pen testing, the
Mm,
penetration testing, the
mm,
updating, to
mm,
make sure that there is regular, almost a threat attack on the building by a friendly, so to speak. So
mm.
you actually can test the firewalls, test that the what is going into the building is actually fit for purpose and doing exactly what it says on the tin. I think it's really important that you have these practical attacks to see what would actually occur.
No, absolutely. Yeah. The penetration testing and you're absolutely best practice for sure. Yeah, no, it just occurred to me then as well, like letting tenants bring in their own technology. Of course, you want to offer that as a service. A lot of tenants want that, but it's similar, I guess, to actually the employer conundrum, right? Where people want to bring their own devices into work. It does sort of extend then the attack surface in a way, right? Because you as the building owner are kind of losing control a bit of like what's coming into the building, and whilst then you maybe can say contractually like it's not really your fault, in some sense it might not matter, because if something happens that may bring down or may deny entry to the whole building and affect your other tenants as well.
And that's why it's really important to ring fence that. So
Mm,
guest Wi-Fi, for example, and those sorts of things. So obviously a clear divide between the actual, effectively the operation of a tenant and their working environment, i.e. servers, etc., you know, I'm going to say multifaceted, but obviously dual authorization, those sorts of things. But if you do have the guests, and you're right, the own devices might not just be the employees, it may be people visiting, the tenants visiting.
mm,
It's very important that the building system actually does designate the specific areas of guest Wi-Fi usage to obviously the actual operation of the business of the tenants' businesses, because
yeah.
that can obviously be monitored a lot easier and switched off, not switched off, but there's a lot more where you know devices are being added to your system. If it's within a controlled environment, it's obviously a lot easier to do something than
Mm,
obviously something happening within a server or you know, a cloud base that's the operation of the business. Does that make
absolutely.
sense?
Yeah, no, good point. From from a sort of more the vendor perspective, what do you think is sort of the expected of them, right? You know, I often think that vendors a lot of the time just see this as a barrier to market adoption and growth, as opposed to it could be also an opportunity, right? Like if they can demonstrate really good cyber security and best practice, that might be a USP for their service. But I mean, what part are they playing in this? Do you think that they can do a better job?
Yeah, I think it, you know, I hate to say it, it'll all come down to the solicitors, which a lot of this does. I mean, you know, we blame not these terrible insurers, but ultimately the solicitors and the contract terms they're actually being engaged with. Because, you know, I've seen things like, you know, an American company trying to hold a effectively a server. They're effectively a business continuity software company. They're
Mhm.
trying to hold them under contract responsible for GDPR breaches.
Mm,
Now, the whole issue with that is obviously data controller and data processor. Now, there's an interesting train of thought here that actually, if you are providing or using a vendor to hold data, but it's all encrypted when it goes into that server or into that cloud or into that management, then actually how could they be held responsible? because whilst they are holding the data, it's encrypted and they actually don't know what's in there. That it's not sensitive information. They don't know. They've got no idea. They've just been asked to effectively hold the data. And we've also seen things like hold harmless agreements going in. So obviously, again, hold harmless agreements are around obligations, again, for effectively the software company or the IT provider, the business continuity provider, to hold or to indemnify the client. And some of them make sense in certain situations. Let's be really clear. If somebody is holding data as far as medical information, let's use that, and the actual receiver of this information or the software provider or the IT provider know full well what it is, then there is duty of responsibility. There is duty to actually protect that data correctly. And I think this is the problem. We're seeing kind of contract terms being pushed in which haven't been thought through to the full execution. And again, it's the solicitors and the business responsibility, should we say, to make sure that those contract terms are fit for purpose, that they do adequately reflect the risk of what each party are bringing to the contract. So I think, my word of advice there is that the contract terms really need to be vetted, pushed back where it's not relevant. And obviously, a solicitor will obviously, explain all of these terminologies, but just to bear in mind, we are seeing things creeping in, which are kind of not in relation to the contracts. Again, sorry, does that make sense? That might be a bit left field.
No, it does. And what I sort of hearing there, it's when you're engaging or you're thinking of bringing technology into a building, you're engaging with a vendor. It's service level agreements and contracts, super important. Read the small print, make sure that you understand what you're buying and what the
parties are doing. I think this is the thing. We've seen ridiculous situations where somebody is doing a very small contract is very immaterial for the risk of the business. Well, in that situation, is it fair for that small contractor to take on the liability of the company? The hold harmless agreements and making people additionally insured under your cyber policies and things like that, so which are very much US focused. And again, the general liability, yes, we do see these sorts of these legal terms creeping in, but I think the big thing is understanding what the vendors are doing and what are they going to provide is so important, so important.
No, absolutely, great point. I wanted to ask as well around sort of obviously cyber crime cover. Is it generally included in normal commercial building insurance, or are you as a building owner or someone who wants to insure your commercial building, are you expected to go and get this as a separate policy?
It's not. You're absolutely right. So what we've seen is cyber crime has been pulled effectively from a lot of policies. So you have to specifically ask. It stays within the cyber policy, but you will find that something like the ransomware extortion, the limit may be lower. So say, for example, you have a 5 million business interruption limit. So the first party section, you then have like a 5 million data if you actually lose people's data from a liability point of view. But then you'll find, and this is why cyber policies are not made equal. They're all very, very different, and all the insurers are doing it slightly differently. But what you have to be really careful is the sublimits within the policies. So you'll have an overarching 5 million, but when you look into it, you may actually have a very, very small amount for extortion and ransomware. So that's the kind of area that you need to look at. There may be a train of thought that people don't feel they're vulnerable, or they've got quite robust systems, etc., etc. So the difference, obviously, let's be really clear, the extortion is obviously they're holding your site to ransom, or they're holding the building to ransom, denial of access, you're not getting in. And then obviously the phishing is obviously where they actually, the cyber crime is obviously they've actually did a phishing exercise, they've worked out what's going on, they've sent you a letter, and somebody has by accident changed bank details. And I'll give you a quick example of that. So I had a client that works for the gig economy. They are basically, I'd like to say they're basically speed dating. So they put the likes of Coca-Cola in touch with a very specific marketing executive who does a specific job. And what actually happened on this particular incident was they finished their job, finished the project, and this contractor, self-employed guy, was owed £40,000. Now, what was going on, unbeknown to anyone, was that again, back to owned devices, so back to speaking about the owned devices, this contractor, from his laptop, he had malware within his system. And the system was actually legitimately talking to our client for a long period of time, sending emails, nice, friendly emails. So when the day came to actually transfer 40,000, they did into the bank account. And when the investigation took place, our client, we needed to find out where it had occurred. And it was very obvious it had occurred within the self-employed contractor. So our client had done nothing wrong. There was nothing wrong with their systems. They followed their own procedures, but £40,000 had been sent to the wrong bank account. And we were found, our client had done nothing wrong. Now, our client, the gig economy, the B2B, we want to call it, or speed dating, as I used to like to call them, they were so mortified, and they wanted to keep this gentleman, they didn't feel it was right. So they sent another 40,000, and we said, you didn't have to do that. But this is where the own devices, the malware that's sitting dormant in people's computers, are actually up to all sorts of things that none of us are really fully aware of. And that's an example where the company had no obligation to pay anybody anything, but they stood by that individual, and they paid another 40,000 because they think that was the fair thing to do. So it is that that crime, that cyber crime, is happening in all sorts of manner of ways. So it's not just we're going to hold your business, or we're going to lock your doors, denial of service, denial of access, we won't let you in the building. There's obviously the others going on, as well as the phishing exercise as well. So just to be mindful, extortion is quite a it's, and again, as I quite back to the point I just made, there is sub-limits within cyber policies that people need to be aware of.
Yeah. Just to remind everybody, we're sort of coming up to about 10 minutes left. So if there are questions for Tina, then please put them in now, because then we can take them and there'll be plenty of time. Something I picked up, which I think and really interesting, and I love this kind of where sort of insurance meets technology, right? And you mentioned sensors for flooding, where they then look at how far up the water is, and then above a certain point, the policy kicks in. And again, I suppose in that same bucket, you could say things like for car insurance. I know it's not commercial, but for like car insurance, where now they're installing cameras in people's cars and stuff. Do you see a future service here where the insurer is also getting more involved in cyber response and IT forensics, so actually doing some of the monitoring and being proactive?
Oh, massive. I mean, the CFC incident's a true incident. That's just unbelievable that they stopped, and that was going to be a huge phishing attack. That was going to be massive on a hospital in France. And the only thing is as I've said, the criminals are well funded, and we've had situations, because obviously from a fraud investigation, etc., we spoke to the people that go out and investigate these individuals, and he told an unbelievable story that there was it was more of the telephone situation. So they rang up all these old people and took effectively their life savings. And the investigation took place, and the guy went to a country to investigate where the loss, and drove in to effectively an office industrial park, and the people working there had dental, had healthcare, and that's what they did. They ranked. So what we're saying is that whilst insurers have got resources and are utilizing, we are finding that obviously these criminals have more and more money, and we always try to be one step ahead of them. And the insurers are doing a very good cat and mouse game. But I do think that there will always be that element that yeah, how far, when you've got kind of this never-ending pot of money, how far can the insurance industry go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the cybercrime is an industry, isn't it? And as your slide said, and often it's state sponsored as well. I mean, that's a hell of a hell of amount of resources that people are putting into this. I guess.
And I always say, the way you should look at cyber is, as the same way as any insurance. You buy a fire policy for your building. You've got sprinklers, you've got exits, you've got fire exits, you've got locks on the windows. You buy a property damage policy, but you've got to bear in mind the criminals are effectively outside with flamethrowers. They're going to come in if they want to come in. Unlike a lot of risk, they will come in if they think, and we haven't even touched on IP theft. There's all sorts of manner of things. So it's just to be very mindful that it is a true risk out there, and it's how you balance it and how you manage that on your balance sheet. And obviously you don't want to be the one that's obviously, there is obviously the well-known incidents of being in front of the TV. And we were saying about insurers, they do actually provide that PR advice. So if an incident does happen, they will tell you what to say. They will tell you how to handle the media, which is actually a massive thing. Brand reputation, as I think we all know, is huge, and sometimes you can never come back from.
Yes, that's definitely part of this, and I think why a lot of companies are very, very cautious, rightly so, but it can have a massive impact on their business. But I guess sort of my question was around like how, because I mean, as you said at the beginning, this is only a 15-year-old kind of thing, right? Cyber insurance, and it is the sense that how do you expect it to evolve? Do you think you'll be offering, or people will offer policies or cover that includes some kind of proactive monitoring to help them mitigate, not just protect, but also maybe mitigate the risks and tell them when something's about to happen?
Yeah. I mean, the technology is out there. The question is, though, it's back to the fact that all I was trying to allude to is whether this is an insurance issue. Whether this is a global, like the pandemic. Is this actually going to be becoming too big for the insurance industry? We've still got cover at the moment, but is it kind of a government response that's needed? Or I don't know. I mean, my gut feeling is that we are going to have cyber insurance is here to stay. I think there will be limits. I think if you want the bells and whistles, it will be like anything else, that you will have to pay for it. So you could get like and I'm already seeing it. AIG is a classic example. You get like a bog standard policy, but then you get a kind of super duper enhanced policy that you get a lot more with regards to things like blacklisting IP addresses and just being mindful of those sorts of things. So I think there will be almost a tiered effect on cyber, but there will be a price to pay for the better coverage.
Yeah, but what an opportunity, right, for companies out there to upsell and make a better service, sell increase revenue. But yeah,
and it's just the fact is, you know, it's what they could do if they really want to commit, you know, a serious attack. You know, that to me is the biggest concern. You know, some of our buildings in the UK, across the world, iconic buildings, you know, we can all think of, that if they actually want to do something pretty horrific from a terrorist point of view, they are given opportunity now, with potential vulnerabilities within buildings.
Oh, right, absolutely. And I think you mentioned the government earlier. I mean, that's where you would expect them to come in. Absolutely, right? You know, we're protecting critical infrastructure from
Yeah, and in the UK, obviously, Paul Ree has been going for some time. Paul Ree is obviously, apologies, you're not familiar. It's actually our terrorism insurance pool. That's actually government, is actually effectively a government pool. Insurers contributes to it, but I think there will be a massive expanse, and that they are expanding that now to talk about terrorism, and cyber in the same breath, which has to be all of us need to consider that.
Yeah. I have one final question for you, Tina. Actually, I'm not on the same path we've been going down, but interesting, I think. Anyway, like how do you go about actually calculating a cyber policy for a building? Like,
it is a difficult one. I said the information is key, and obviously information with insurance is always key, but more so in cyber. And what I mean by that is it asks you a lot more around your firewalls, around your internal procedures, whether, and obviously I mentioned about the human element, what your employees are doing, what your tenants are doing. It asks a lot more around that side. And I would say, you know, I had a situation with a large retailer, who the company secretary was a little bit angry because we were trying to get obviously cyber insurance, and she was saying, I'd like insurance to protect me against my job. And what she meant was that she believed that the IT security team, who had a cast of, I think it was about 30 in the team, you know, why should they be protected? And I thought that was such the wrong way to look at it, because the company secretary are protected, the FDs are protected, the employees are protected, and it's exactly the same way. It's, you know, and I do believe the best engagement when you are purchasing cyber is absolutely getting the IT guys involved, and even getting the providers. So I've done calls not just with the company. I actually have their IT providers on the phone, their security IT providers, and explaining to me what they've done and how they go about protecting effectively the assets, the liability of the company. And it is on boardrooms. I mean, I'm going to say, just mindful of time, but I had you know, again, 15 years ago, I came across a group of guys that left IBM, started an IT security company. And we always laugh that when I first met them, they could never get to the board. They could never sit in front of the board. And they were trying to articulate cyber and the risk to the businesses. And now we laugh about it, that they can actually get to the board table all the time, because people are much, much more aware. So it is a board agenda, and I think it should be a board agenda, but it also should be, you know, that information gathering exercise needs to include so many parts of the business, because so much questions are asked about what you're holding from customer all the way through to obviously employees as well.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. Thank you. Tina, if people want to get hold of you and ask you some questions or find out more about what you do, what's the best way of finding you?
My email address, which you have, you're more than welcome to share. And obviously the LinkedIn is obviously a good barometer of kind of making contact with people nowadays. So whatever is easier, more than happy to chat or to go into any specifics on any areas or any concerns anybody has that's on the call today.
Great stuff. And anyone who listens to it afterwards as well, because we have
absolutely.
We've recorded it, and sure, anyone who wants more advice or information on cybersecurity insurance, reach out to Tina. And look, Tina, thank you so much. It was really, really interesting and fascinating topics. So I've learned something today anyway. So I can't always say that. definitely have today. Thank you.
Good, good. And you know, always happy to talk doom and gloom, as we always say. If there's any other topics, as I said, I can go in all sorts of directions. But no, thank you for the opportunity today, and I hope it was interesting to everyone that's been listening.
Good, yes. And yeah, for everyone out there, we have recorded the session, so I'll make sure that goes up on our YouTube channel. If you search for the Smart Building series on YouTube, you'll find it, and it'll be up there shortly. And also you'll find it on our website as well. So yeah, thanks everybody for listening. Yeah, please share it with colleagues, and follow us on YouTube or on Twitter as well. You can find us Memory, MEMOORI. Thanks very much, Tina.
Thanks again. Take
Bye-bye.
care.